The brass key felt heavier than it should have in Raymond Fletcher's calloused
For
palm.
the new
66 years of
owners.
living had taught him that weight wasn't always measured in ounces. Sometimes it was measured in decades and memories, in all the things a man carried whether he wanted to or not. He stood on the cracked sidewalk outside Fletcher's Electronics, the autumn sun painting long shadows across Maple Street in Riverside, Oregon. The key ring held 6 keys, each one worn smooth from 42 years of opening and closing. 42 years of unlocking a door every morning at 7, locking it every evening at 6. 42 years of fixing what other people broke. The sign above the door read, Fletcher's Electronics. We fix what's broken, in faded red letters. Ray had painted those letters himself in 1983, standing on a ladder with his back still strong
so
and
good
his
to
hands still
see you
steady.
both.
Now both were failing
The
him,
feeling
but
is
he'd kept the shop
mutual.
running through
Take
sheer
care.
stubbornness and
Until
muscle
next
memory.
time.
He turned the key one final time. The lock clicked with a sound that felt too small for such a permanent moment. Ray pulled the key free, held it up to the light, then slid it off the ring and placed it in the envelope for the new owners. A young couple from Portland who wanted to turn his life's work into a coffee roastery. They talked about exposed brick and artisan blends with the kind of enthusiasm that made Ray feel ancient. Inside, cardboard boxes sat stacked in rows, 4 decades reduced to a dozen containers. His tools, his records, his ledger books, all packed and labeled with the methodical precision of a man who'd spent his life diagnosing problems through patience and logic. The workbench where he'd taught 3 children how to use a multimeter. The fluorescent lights that had hummed above countless repair jobs. The smell of solder flux and machine oil now fading like everything else. Ray didn't linger. Men of his generation didn't believe in wallowing. He loaded the boxes into his truck one at a time, feeling the protest in his lower back, but refusing to acknowledge it. When the last box was secured, he climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine without looking back. The house he'd rented for the past 5 years sat on the edge of town, a 2-bedroom bungalow that had always been too big for one man. Ray pulled into the driveway and killed the engine, then sat listening to the tick of cooling metal. His phone sat dark on the passenger seat. No missed calls, no messages, just the silence of a Tuesday evening in a life gone quiet. He'd raised 3 children in this town. Mitchell, 43, now a corporate lawyer in Seattle with corner office views of Elliott Bay. Claire, 40, a real estate developer who flew between Portland and San Francisco with the kind of restless energy that reminded Ray of her mother. Owen, 36, the baby working for tech startups in Austin and sending text messages on holidays like they were postcards from a stranger. 5 grandchildren whose faces Ray knew mainly from Christmas cards and Facebook photos. Preston and Dylan, Mitchell's boys, teenagers already. Claire's daughter, Grace, 12 and growing up fast. Owen's twin girls, Lily and Ruby, 5 years old and strangers to their grandfather. The phone rang while Ray was heating up leftover meatloaf in the microwave. Mitchell's name on the screen. Ray answered on the 3rd ring, keeping his voice steady. Hey, Dad, just checking in. Hey, son, how's work? Busy. Big merger closing Friday. Patricia says hi. How are the boys? Good. Preston made honor roll again. Dylan's on varsity basketball now. That's good. Real good. Silence stretched between them, filled with all the things neither man knew how to say. Ray could hear the hum of office air conditioning in the background, the distant sound of keyboards clicking. You okay out there, settling in all right after closing the shop? Yeah, keeping busy. You could move up here. Seattle's nice. See the boys more. Maybe. They both knew what maybe meant. It meant no, not in this lifetime, not unless something fundamental changed in the universe. It meant the same thing it had meant for the past 20 years. All right, well, gotta run. Call you next week. Sure, tell the boys I said hi. The phone went dark. 3 minutes and 47 seconds. Ray set it on the kitchen table and finished his meatloaf standing at the counter, washing it down with the beer he didn't really taste. The walls were bare except for a single photograph from 1995, the last time all of them had been together in one frame. Nora was still alive, then still fighting. They'd all still known how to smile like they meant it. That night, Ray sat at his kitchen table with his laptop open and a football game playing unwatched on the television. The Seahawks were losing to the 49ers, but Ray couldn't have said what the score was. His fingers moved across the keyboard with the hesitant hunt and peck of a man who'd learned computers late in life. He wasn't searching for real estate because he wanted to. He was searching because he needed something to do with the money from the shop sale and the empty hours stretching ahead of him. The $127,000 wouldn't last forever, not with rent at $850 a month and Social Security still 2 years away. He needed somewhere cheaper, somewhere he could work with his hands, somewhere that wouldn't echo quite so loudly with absence. The search parameters were practical, fixer-upper under 50,000, Washington or Oregon. Ray scrolled through listings with the same methodical attention he'd given to circuit board diagnostics. Too expensive, too far gone, too close to people. Then he found it. Sheriff's auction, tax foreclosure, $10 minimum bid. Ray stopped scrolling. His finger hovered over the mousepad, then clicked. The listing loaded slowly, revealing a Victorian mansion that looked like it had been abandoned by time itself. 4,200 square feet, 3.5 acres. Rural Washington State, 2.5 hours north of Seattle. As is where is no showings, no inspections. The owner had died in 2018 with no heirs and $47,000 in tax debt. The county just wanted it gone. Ray studied the photographs with a craftsman's eye. The foundation looked solid old brick from an era when they built things to last. The roof sagged in the middle, probably needed $12,000 to replace, but the rest of the structure seemed intact. 12 broken windows, but 11 still holding. The porch had that spongy look of rot, but the posts appeared salvageable. Then his eyes caught something in the front yard that made his pulse quicken. A Cessna 182 late 60s model by the look of it, sitting in the grass like a lawn ornament from someone's fever dream. The paint had faded to gray, the wheels sunk into earth, but the fuselage looked whole. Ray had fixed avionics for 2 planes just like it back in the 90s. He knew that model, knew it was worth $40,000, restored 3 or 4 even as scrap metal. Beside the plane sat a Dodge Charger 1969, if Ray was reading the body lines right. His dream car from high school, the one he'd never been able to afford. It sat on flat tires under a Douglas fir covered in pine needles and bird droppings, but the body looked solid. Ray opened a new spreadsheet because that's what men like him did when faced with decisions. Costs in one column, assets in another. Purchase price $10. Property tax estimate $2,800 annually. Repairs year 1 doing it himself $15,000. Utilities reconnection $500. Against that, the Cessna minimum $3,000 in scrap. The Charger at least $2,000 in parts. Salvageable materials another $1,000. And the land itself 3.5 acres in Washington worth $40,000 easily. But numbers only told part of the story. The rest was written in the spaces between in the workshop, with the caved-in roof and the garage leaning at a 30-degree angle. In the isolation of a property hours from anywhere. In the promise of projects that would fill his days and quiet his mind. At 11:47 p.m. with the football game long over and a second beer half finished, Ray entered his bid, $10. His finger hesitated over the submit button, not because he was drunk, but because he was calculating the risk the way he'd always calculated risk. Could he afford to be wrong? Could he afford not to try? He clicked. The confirmation email arrived within minutes. Congratulations. Winning bid $10. Property includes all contents and personal belongings of former owner Captain B. Walsh, USAF, retired, 1937 to 2018. Closing in 21 days. Ray read the name twice. Captain B. Walsh, United States Air Force, a veteran like Ray's father had been. Army 2 tours in Vietnam, 1968 to 1970, came home with pieces missing that he never talked about. Ray felt something shift in his chest, some recognition that crossed decades and service branches. Veterans understood other veterans in ways civilians never could. 3 weeks later, on a gray October morning that smelled like rain and pine needles, Ray loaded everything he owned into his truck. It didn't take long. He'd never been a man who accumulated things, tools mostly, clothes, a box of photographs he couldn't look at but couldn't throw away. The leather-bound ledger from the shop, 42 years of repairs, documented in his careful handwriting. The drive north took him through country he'd never seen up along the Columbia River Gorge and then into the dense forests of Washington. The roads got narrower, the houses farther apart until he was driving through corridors of Douglas fir, so tall they blocked out the sky. The mansion sat at the end of a gravel drive hidden from the road by trees and time. Ray pulled up slowly, taking it in. The photographs hadn't lied, but they hadn't told the whole truth either. The house was worse than he'd expected, and better at the same time. Worse because the decay was deeper than pixels could show, the windows more broken, the wilderness more aggressive in its reclamation. Better because it was real solid, a problem he could solve with his hands and his tools and his time. He climbed out of the truck and stood in the silence. No traffic sounds, no neighbors. Just wine moving through the pines and the creak of old wood settling. The Cessna sat exactly where the photos had shown it, a ghost of its former self. Ray walked to it first, running his hand along the fuselage. The serial number was still visible, N3847X, registered 1968. The door opened with a squeal of corroded hinges. Inside, the cockpit smelled like old leather and engine oil and abandonment. Flight instruments hung at odd angles. The seats were cracked and faded. But under the pilot's seat, Ray found a leather flight jacket with a name patch stitched to the chest, Captain B. Walsh. He lifted the jacket, carefully held it up to the fading light. Vietnam service patch on the sleeve. The leather was cracked but intact, and when Ray brought it close, he could smell the faint ghost of jet fuel and coffee and something indefinably human. He hung the jacket back on its hook in the cockpit, in memorial to a man he'd never met. The Charger was next. Ray's hands actually shook as he opened the driver's door. A 1969 Charger RT with the 440 Magnum 5.8 4-speed manual transmission. The interior was a disaster of mouse nests and rotted upholstery, but when Ray popped the hood, his heart jumped. The engine was still there, unmolested, all 700 pounds of American muscle car poetry. The block looked solid, no visible cracks. The pistons were seized, but that was fixable. Everything was fixable with enough time and money and will. Ray spent an hour under that hood cataloging what he'd need. Rebuild kit for the engine, maybe 3,500 in parts. Bodywork, 8,000. Interior, 3. Total cost, 15 to 20,000. Current value when finished, 60 to 80. And more importantly, something to work on. Something to make whole again. The house itself he saved for last, approaching it the way a man approaches anything that demands respect. The front door was unlocked. Ray pushed it open and stepped into a time capsule. Furniture covered in dusty white sheets. A calendar on the kitchen wall showing March 2017. Dishes still in the cabinets. Photographs on every wall, 40 years of frozen moments in cheap frames. He moved through the rooms methodically, testing floors for weak spots, checking walls for water damage, opening faucets to see if the pipes still held. The water ran brown for 5 minutes before clearing. The electricity worked in maybe 60% of the outlets. The furnace was an old oil-fired unit from the 80s, but Ray knew that model, could probably get it running. The second floor held 3 bedrooms and a bathroom with tile from the 70s. In the master bedroom, Ray found more photographs on the nightstand. A younger version of Captain Walsh in flight suits, standing beside planes, shaking hands with people in exotic locations. Always alone. Never a wife, never children. Just the missions and the machines. Ray didn't go to the 3rd floor. The water damage there was too severe, the stairs too questionable. He'd deal with that later, if ever. On the ground floor and in the back of the house, Ray found the study. He stood in the doorway for a long time before entering. Something about the room felt sacred, like a church or a grave. Floor-to-ceiling mahogany bookshelves lined 3 walls packed with volumes on aviation, military history, geography. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, hand-cut mortise and tenon joints that spoke of a master woodworker. The desk was solid oak, 6 feet long, its surface buried under years of dust. The 4th wall was covered in photographs. 40 or 50 frames arranged chronologically from left to right. Young pilot to old man, Vietnam to Cambodia to Ethiopia to Nicaragua. Always planes, always missions. The progression of a life told in frozen moments. Beside the doorframe hung a small hook with a brass key ring. Engraved on the ring, study Captain B. Walsh. 6 keys total, 1 for the desk, Ray guessed, the others for the filing cabinets lined against the back wall. Ray reached for the keys, then stopped. His hand hung in the air, trembling slightly. Did he have the right? This was a man's entire life locked away in drawers and cabinets. His secrets, his pain, his private thoughts. The county might have sold the house for $10, but that didn't make Ray entitled to everything inside. But if not him, then who? The county would bulldoze it all eventually. At least Ray would be respectful. At least Ray would try to understand. He took the keys. That first night, Ray unrolled his sleeping bag on the parlor floor and lay awake listening to the house settle around him. The wind moved through gaps in the walls, making sounds like breathing. The furnace kicked on with a groan that spoke of age and neglect. Somewhere above, something small scratched in the walls. Ray stared at the ceiling and wondered what exactly he thought he was doing here. The honest answer came to him just before sleep. He was looking for something. He didn't know what yet, but he'd know it when he found it. The first week passed in a blur of practical work. Ray drained the water lines and flushed the sediment. He checked the furnace, found the oil tank a quarter full, coaxed the old beast back to life. He cleared mouse nests from the kitchen cabinets and patched the worst roof leaks with tarps and salvaged lumber from the collapsed workshop. He slept in his sleeping bag and ate standing at the counter and worked 14-hour days without thinking about it because this was what he knew how to do. Fix things, make things work, solve problems one at a time until the whole machine ran smoothly again. On the third day, Mitchell called. "Dad, where are you? I tried the house phone." "Moved. Bought a place up in Washington." A pause that stretched too long. "Washington when? Why didn't you tell us?" "Just happened fast. Found a good deal. Needs work." "What kind of place?" Mitchell's voice had that careful tone, the one he used with unpredictable clients. "Old Victorian, big, got a lot of land." "Dad, are you okay? This seems sudden." "I'm fine, keeping busy. Got projects to work on." "What kind of projects?" "There's a '69 Charger here, original 440, needs restore." Another pause, but different this time. "Your dream car?" "Yeah." "Okay." Mitchell's voice softened slightly. "We'll call if you need anything." "Will do." Ray set the phone down and went back to work on the kitchen plumbing. Emotions were easier to handle when your hands were busy. By the 8th day, Ray had made the house minimally livable. Water ran clear, heat worked, one bathroom functioned. The kitchen was clean enough to use. Everything else could wait. He stood in front of the study door and felt his heart rate increase. He'd been avoiding this room, making excuses, finding other work that needed doing first. But there were no more excuses left. Ray unlocked the door and entered. Late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. He sat down in Captain Walsh's desk chair, feeling the worn leather conform to his weight. The chair had been sat in so many times that it held the shape of another man's body. Ray tried the first key on the desk's top left drawer. It turned smoothly. Inside, he found official flight logs, standard-issue military navigation records. The entries were technical and brief. March 12, 1968, Da Nang to Saigon, cargo transport. April 28, 1975, Saigon evacuation support 3 runs. Professional. By the book. Nothing personal. The second drawer held maps and charts. Southeast Asia aviation charts with hand-marked routes and notations in the margins. The third drawer contained military commendations in their original boxes. Air Medal, Distinguished Flying Cross, Vietnam Service Medal, and at the bottom in a velvet case, a Purple Heart. Ray held the Purple Heart up to the light, feeling the weight of it. Captain Walsh had been wounded in action. Shot at, probably shot down, definitely hurt badly enough to earn this. Ray thought about his father, who'd also come home with a Purple Heart and nightmares he never shared. The fourth drawer held photographs and letters from military buddies, Christmas cards that stopped arriving around 1995, evidence of friendships that had faded or ended or been cut off by death. The fifth drawer, bottom right, had a different lock, smaller, separate from the others. Ray tried keys until number 4 worked. The drawer slid open to reveal cassette tapes, bundled letters, and photographs. Ray pulled out the letters first. 47 envelopes held together by a rubber band so old it crumbled at his touch. Every single envelope was addressed to Annette Walsh at different addresses, all crossed out. None of them had been mailed. Ray's hands went still. His breathing slowed. He picked up the first envelope, postmarked 1970, and carefully opened it. The paper inside was yellowed but intact, covered in precise handwriting. "Dear Annette, you're 3 years old now, and I wonder if you look like your mother or like me. I wonder if your new parents let you play in the dirt or if they keep you in fancy dresses. I wonder if you're happy. That's all I wanted for you. A better life than I could give you at 19 years old with nothing but a fresh pilot's license and a head full of dreams. Your mother was braver than me. She held you, named you, and then let you go to a family who could give you everything. I couldn't even do that. I left before you were born because I was scared and stupid and thought running away was the same as being strong. I'm searching for you now. I've hired an investigator, and he says the adoption records are sealed, but there has to be a way. I need you to know I didn't forget you. I never forgot you. Love your father. Ray read the letter 3 times. Then he set it down carefully and walked outside. He stood beside the Cessna, lit a cigarette, even though he'd quit 10 years ago, the emergency pack still in his glove box for moments like this. He smoked and looked at the mountains and thought about fathers and daughters and the ways men fail the people they love. Captain Walsh had been a pilot, a Vietnam veteran, a man who flew humanitarian missions and saved lives and searched for redemption in every face he rescued. But he'd abandoned his own daughter before she was born and spent 50 years trying to walk that decision back. Ray had stayed, raised 3 kids alone after Nora died, kept them fed and clothed and safe. But they were gone anyway, scattered across the country, calling once a month out of obligation. Different paths, same failure. Ray finished the cigarette and went back inside. He read all 47 letters in one sitting. It took 4 hours. He didn't skip a single word. The sun set and Ray didn't turn on the lights, just sat in the gathering darkness with Captain Walsh's ghost and the weight of 50 years of unsent love. The letters progressed from hope to desperation to resignation to a kind of weary acceptance that never quite masked the underlying grief. The early ones from the 70s were energetic. Walsh wrote about leads he was chasing and investigators he'd hired, agencies he'd contacted. He wrote about his missions, the people he'd helped, the children who reminded him of Annette. There was momentum, forward motion, a man who believed answers were just around the next corner. By the 80s, the tone had changed. The leads had dried up. The investigators had come back empty-handed. Walsh's questions became more philosophical, less certain. I wonder sometimes if I'm looking for you, or just looking, he wrote in 1982. If finding you would mean the search ends, and then what would I be? The 90s brought a different voice entirely. Longer letters, more reflective, written by a man who understood he might never find what he was looking for. I'm 58 now, Walsh wrote in 1995. The age you'll be when you read this, if you ever do. I've saved hundreds of lives over the years, but I couldn't save us. I couldn't save the relationship we never had. The final letters from the 2000s and 2010s had the quality of a man speaking to a ghost. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead, Walsh wrote in 2010. I'm 73 years old. My hands shake. My vision's going. I sit in this house with all these photographs and all these memories of places you never were. I hope you've been happy. I hope your parents loved you. I hope you never felt the hole I felt. Ray sat in the dark and felt something break loose in his chest. Not tears exactly. Men his age didn't cry easily, but something deeper than tears, some fundamental shift in how he understood his own life. He hadn't abandoned his children the way Walsh had, but he'd lost them anyway. Been too tired, too sad, too focused on survival to really see them. Provided for them, but hadn't known them. And now they were strangers who called out of duty, not love. Ray stood up and found the light switch. The study flooded with harsh fluorescent brightness. He looked at the photographs on the wall, the chronological progression of Walsh's life, the young pilot with his whole future ahead, the middle-aged man still searching, the old man alone with his regrets. Then Ray looked at the desk, at the remaining drawers he hadn't opened yet, at the filing cabinets against the wall, at the 3 cassette tapes sitting in the bottom drawer. Walsh had left a message for whoever found this room. To whoever finds this, please finish what I couldn't, the envelope had said. Ray picked up that envelope, now studied the handwriting. The hand of a man who'd run out of time, but not hope. Ray made a decision. Not an emotional one. A practical one, the kind he'd made his whole life. Walsh was a veteran who'd left a mission unfinished. Ray could finish it, should finish it. Veterans helped veterans. It was that simple. Ray pulled out the cassette tapes and found an old realistic brand recorder in one of the desk drawers. The battery compartment was corroded, but Ray cleaned the terminals with the automatic precision of a man who'd spent his life fixing electronics. He inserted fresh batteries. The recorder hummed to life. Ray loaded the first tape and pressed play. Static crackled. Then a click. Then Captain Benjamin Walsh's voice filled the study, deep and worn with a southern accent that spoke of Tennessee or Kentucky. December 12, 1988. I'm recording this because I need to say it out loud and there's nobody here to listen. A pause. The sound of a chair creaking, the same chair Ray was sitting in now. 21 years I've been looking for her. 21 years of private investigators, false leads, doors that won't open. The adoption agency closed. Records sealed by court order. I've hit every wall there is to hit. Another pause longer. The sound of breathing heavy and labored. But I keep flying. Everywhere I go, Cambodia, Ethiopia, Nicaragua, I look at the children. Wonder if she's out there somewhere. If she looks like Maggie. If she's happy. If she even knows I exist. Walsh's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Probably doesn't. Probably better she doesn't. What would I even say? Sorry I ran away before you were born, but I saved some strangers to make up for it. A bitter laugh, harsh and short. Saved 43 people in Cambodia last month. Unauthorized flight, middle of a firefight. Could lose my license. Could go to prison. But they're alive. Does that balance the ledger? Does saving strangers cancel out abandoning your own blood? A long silence. Then the click of the recorder stopping. Ray sat frozen. He rewound the tape and played it again, listening for what Walsh hadn't said as much as what he had. The guilt. The survivor's remorse. The mission-focused coping mechanism that let a man function while his heart was breaking. Ray recognized it because his father had sounded the same way. Army Vietnam 2 tours, came home and worked at a garage for 30 years, fixing engines instead of talking about what he'd seen. The same pattern, the same wound, the same generation of men who channeled everything into work because work was something they could control. Walsh hadn't been searching for his daughter to heal. Walsh had been flying missions because he couldn't stop. Because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. The search had given him purpose. The missions had given him redemption, or at least the illusion of it, and now he was dead alone in this house, having never found the one person he had spent 50 years looking for. Ray stood and walked to the window. Outside, the Cessna sat in the gathering twilight, a monument to courage and failure, and the unbearable weight of regret. Tomorrow, Ray would begin the search, not for himself, not for closure or healing, or any of the soft words that didn't mean anything to men like him and Walsh. He'd do it because Walsh had been a veteran with an unfinished mission. And veterans finished missions even if they had to cross the grave to do it. That was enough reason. That was the only reason that mattered. The library in Cedar Falls opened at 9 a.m. sharp. Ray was waiting in the parking lot at 8:45, truck engine ticking as it cooled, a spiral notebook on the passenger seat with Captain Walsh's name written at the top in careful block letters. The building was brick, probably built in the 70s, with that institutional architecture that said government budget and good intentions. Mrs. Evelyn Park unlocked the front doors at exactly 9 o'clock. She was 70 if she was a day, with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the patient expression of someone who'd spent decades helping people find answers to questions they didn't quite know how to ask. Morning, Ray said, following her inside. Need to use your computers. Research. Help yourself. She gestured toward a row of terminals against the far wall. You need help getting started. I'll manage, thank you. Ray had learned computers late, the way his generation had, hunting and pecking instead of typing, clicking carefully instead of navigating with instinct. But he was methodical, patient, thorough. The same qualities that made him good at electronics repair made him decent at internet searches. He started with the basics. Benjamin Allen Walsh, Captain, United States Air Force. The results came quickly, surprisingly complete for a man who'd lived alone and died with no family. The obituary was brief. Captain Benjamin Allen Walsh, 81, died Tuesday at Evergreen Veterans Hospital in Seattle. Walsh served in the United States Air Force from 1965 to 1990, including multiple tours in Southeast Asia. After his military service, he worked as an independent contractor for humanitarian organizations, flying relief missions in conflict zones. He is survived by no immediate family. Service is private. No immediate family. 4 words that contained an entire life of loneliness. Ray dug deeper. Military records showed commendations for service in Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 air medals, Purple Heart. The official record painted a picture of a decorated officer who'd served with distinction. But the mentions of post-retirement work were vaguer. References to flights for Doctors Without Borders and the International Red Cross, though nothing official or detailed. Walsh had operated in the gaps, apparently, flying missions that needed doing but didn't fit into official channels. Ray pulled out the business card he'd found tucked inside one of Walsh's letters. Cascade Family Services, Portland, Oregon. The address was from the 60s, the phone number an old exchange that probably hadn't worked in decades. He tried it anyway, standing in the library vestibule with his cell phone. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Mrs. Park helped him search historical business records. Cascade Family Services had closed in 1995, its files transferred to the Oregon Department of Human Services. She explained gently, like she'd had this conversation before, that adoption records were typically sealed for 99 years unless a court ordered them opened. You'd need to be immediate family, she said, or have legal standing. I'm neither, Ray admitted, just trying to finish something for a fellow veteran. He spent his whole life looking for his daughter, died without finding her. Thought maybe I could see it through. Something shifted in Mrs. Park's expression. She looked at Ray for a long moment, then nodded slowly. That's kind. Most people wouldn't bother. She paused, choosing her words. I was adopted in 1963. Didn't find my birth mother until I was 52, and by then she'd been dead for 3 years. I understand what it means not knowing. She brought him coffee without asking and showed him how to narrow his searches. Ray spent another 2 hours digging before his back forced him to stand and stretch. He'd found the thread he needed. Theodore and June Carlisle, Tacoma, Washington. Missionaries. The names from Walsh's letters, the couple the investigator had tracked in 1982. Theodore Carlisle had died in 2003. June in 2011. Their obituaries mentioned surviving family. A daughter, Ellen Carlisle Porter. Ray's pulse quickened. Ellen. Could Annette have kept her first name, just adjusted the sound Annette to Ellen wasn't such a leap? And the age would be right, 58 in 2025 if she'd been born in 1967. But that wasn't proof, that was hope, and hope wasn't the same as confirmation. Ray drove home through rain that started light and turned heavy. 3 hours a round trip to the library, but he had a name now. Ellen Carlisle Porter, and a plan for tomorrow. The Washington State Archives in Olympia. If the records existed anywhere, they'd exist there. Back at the mansion, Ray changed into work clothes and went straight to the garage. The Charger sat waiting, patient as a sleeping animal. Ray had pulled the engine 2 days ago, a 600-pound lump of cast iron and aluminum, now sitting on an engine stand he'd built from scrap lumber and salvaged steel. He spent the next 4 hours with his hands deep in machinery, removing the cylinder heads, inspecting pistons, measuring tolerances with calipers worn smooth from decades of use. The work was meditative, requiring just enough focus to keep his mind from wandering, but not so much that he couldn't think. Walsh had flown missions into war zones, had risked his life hundreds of times for strangers, but couldn't find his own daughter because the law said those records were sealed, because bureaucracy was stronger than blood, because some things stayed broken no matter how hard you tried to fix them. Ray's phone rang while he was torquing head bolts. He wiped his hands on a rag and checked the screen. Mitchell. Dad. Hey, son, what's up? I've been thinking about what we talked about doing better, staying connected. Mitchell's voice had a quality Ray rarely heard, something uncertain and genuine. Dylan's on fall break in 2 weeks. He's really into cars now, taking shop class. Could we come up? I'd like to see this place. Dylan would love to help with the Charger. Ray felt something loosen in his chest. Yeah, that'd be good. Okay, I'll text you dates. The call lasted 6 minutes, longer than they'd talked in months. When it ended, Ray stood in the garage holding his phone and looking at the Charger like it had just revealed a secret. The car was a language they could speak together, a way to be in the same space without having to navigate the minefield of everything they'd never said. The next morning, Ray drove to Olympia, 3 hours through rain that never quite stopped past Tacoma and across the Nisqually River into the state capital. The Washington State Archives occupied a modern building, all glass and concrete. and climate-controlled air. Phyllis Chen sat at the reference desk, her nameplate precise and professional. Ray explained what he needed, carefully choosing words that wouldn't trigger automatic denials. Adoption records from the 60s, Phyllis said. I can tell you right now most are sealed. Privacy laws. Even with the adoptive parents deceased, we can't release identifying information without a court order. I understand. Ray leaned against the desk, meeting her eyes. The man who owned my house spent his whole life looking for his daughter. He died without finding her. I thought maybe I could finish what he started. Phyllis studied him for a moment, then something in her expression softened. That's kind. Most people wouldn't bother. She glanced around, then lowered her voice. I was adopted in 1963, Korean War orphan. Didn't find my birth mother until I was 52. She'd been dead for 3 years. I understand what it means not knowing. She disappeared into the archives and returned 20 minutes later with a thin folder. This is what I can give you without breaking any laws. It's not much. Ray opened the folder carefully. Inside was a case summary sheet from Cascade Family Services. No names, just case numbers and dates. But one entry matched the timeline. Female infant, born March 14, 1967. Placed with adoptive family, April 1967. Adoptive parents listed only as T. Carlisle and J. Carlisle, Tacoma, Washington. That's her, Ray said quietly. That's Annette. Phyllis sat down across from him. The file notes that the adoption was closed, meaning no contact between birth and adoptive families. That was common then. People thought it was cleaner that way. If she wanted to find an information about her birth parents, now she could petition the court. Sometimes they'll open records if both parties consent or if there's a compelling reason. But she'd have to initiate it. Ray thanked her and drove back in the dark, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm against the rain. His mind was full of questions that had no good answers. How did you tell someone their biological father spent his life searching for them? How did you deliver love that arrived 50 years too late at the mansion he made coffee and went back to the study? There had to be more, something he'd missed. He went through the document boxes again more carefully this time, and at the bottom of the third box, his fingers found something wrong. The weight didn't match the contents. Ray lifted everything out and examined the box itself. The bottom was doubled 2 pieces of cardboard where there should be one. He worked his fingernail into the seam and pried gently. The false bottom lifted to reveal a manila folder, military green, with a red stamp across the front. Declassified, 2012. Ray's hands shook as he opened it. Inside was a mission report, the cover page stamped with official seals and authorization codes. Operation Frequent Wind Precursor. Cambodia Evacuation Flight. November 18, 1973. He read slowly, his mechanic's hands careful with the aging paper. The report detailed an unauthorized humanitarian flight. Captain Benjamin Walsh, piloting a Cessna 182, had flown into Cambodia during what was officially listed as a ceasefire but was functionally active combat. His mission: evacuate American missionaries and Cambodian civilians at risk from advancing forces. The flight had been dangerous. Engine trouble at 10,000 feet, ground fire that damaged the rudder, a landing on a damaged airstrip with minimal fuel remaining. The report noted that Walsh had violated multiple protocols, exceeded aircraft weight limits, and operated without proper authorization. It also noted that he'd saved 43 lives. Ray turned to the manifest documented by Red Cross personnel upon arrival in Thailand. Names, ages, nationalities. His eyes moved down the list mechanically, at first, then stopped so suddenly his vision blurred. Line 17. Carlisle L&M, age 6, American, daughter of Theodore and June Carlisle, missionaries. Ray read it 3 times, 4 times, 5. The paper trembled in his hands. He set it down carefully, stood up, walked to the window, walked back, picked up the report again. The words hadn't changed. L&M Carlisle, age 6, November 1973. The math was simple. Born March 1967, she would have been 6 years old in November 1973. Theodore and June Carlisle, the adoptive parents. Missionaries who'd worked in Cambodia from 1970 to 1973. Benjamin Walsh had saved his own daughter's life and never knew it. Ray sat down heavily in Walsh's chair. The magnitude of it hit in waves. Walsh had flown into a combat zone to evacuate civilians. Among those civilians was a family with a 6-year-old daughter named Ellen. Walsh had loaded them onto his plane, flown them through failing engines and ground fire, landed with equipment that should have killed them all, and delivered them safely to Thailand. He'd saved 43 people that day. One of them was the daughter he'd been searching for since 1967, and he'd never known. Ray read through the rest of the report with mounting emotion that he refused to name. The details painted a picture of extraordinary courage. Engine failure 30 minutes from the landing site, ground fire that damaged the rudder, an emergency landing on a strip that was partially destroyed. Walsh had kept the plane in the air through skill and determination, refusing to turn back, refusing to leave anyone behind. Among the additional documents was a Red Cross interview with the children conducted days after the evacuation for psychological assessment. Ray found Ellen's statement typed on a form yellowed with age. Interview subject, Ellen Carlisle. Age 6. Can you tell me about the flight? I was scared. There was loud noises. Mommy and Daddy said we had to leave fast. What about the pilot? He was nice. He let me see the clouds out the window. I was cold, and he gave me his jacket. It smelled like coffee. He had kind eyes. He told me to be brave, so I was brave. The pilot said brave people help each other. He was the bravest. Ray read the words 5 times. Walsh had comforted his own daughter during one of the most dangerous moments of his career, had given her his jacket, had told her to be brave, the jacket that was still hanging in the Cessna's cockpit. The jacket Ellen had worn when she was 6 years old fleeing Cambodia, terrified and cold. And neither of them had known. The cosmic irony was almost unbearable. Walsh had spent decades flying missions to dangerous places, saving strangers searching for redemption. In one of those missions, he'd accomplished what he'd set out to do. He'd been there for his daughter when she needed him most. He just hadn't known who she was. Ray walked outside and stood by the Cessna. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cold. He put his hand on the fuselage, the same metal that had carried Ellen to safety 52 years ago. The same plane Walsh had flown into hell and back over and over, always searching, always hoping. Would knowing have changed anything? Would it have healed Walsh or haunted him more? Would it have satisfied his need for redemption or deepened his regret about all the years between? Ray didn't know. But Ellen had a right to know. Not just that her biological father had searched for her, not just that he'd loved her from a distance, but that he'd saved her life. That his heroism wasn't abstract. It was concrete, documented, real. She'd been there. She'd experienced it. The kind pilot with the gentle voice was her father. The story had an ending after all, not the one Walsh had hoped for. He'd died without knowing, but an ending that gave meaning to all those years of searching. Ray spent the next 3 days drafting a letter. The first attempt was too formal, reading like a legal document. The second was too emotional, drowning in sentiment. The third tried too hard to be casual and ended up sounding insane. The fourth draft felt right. Ray wrote it by hand on good paper he'd bought in town using a blue pen because black felt too harsh for this kind of message. Dear Mrs. Carlisle Porter, my name is Raymond Fletcher. I'm a 66-year-old veteran son and retired electronics repairman from Oregon. I recently purchased a foreclosed property in Washington State that belonged to Captain Benjamin Walsh, United States Air Force, retired, who passed in 2018. While settling the property, I found personal papers, flight records, and letters Captain Walsh left behind. After considerable research, and I want to be direct with you, I believe you are the daughter he spent much of his life searching for. I know this must come as a shock. I'm not writing to intrude or upset you. I'm writing because I believe you have a right to know your biological father's story, and because that story is more extraordinary than either of us might have imagined. Captain Walsh flew humanitarian missions from 1968 to 1990, mostly unauthorized, always dangerous, always to save lives. He saved over 200 people in war zones and disaster areas. One of those missions was November 18, 1973, evacuating missionaries from Cambodia. I've enclosed a declassified military document from that mission. You'll find your name on the passenger list. Captain Walsh saved your life when you were 6 years old. He didn't know you were his daughter, but he saved you anyway. If you'd like to know more, see his house, read his letters, understand who he was, you're welcome to visit any time. Everything here belongs to you more than it belongs to me. If you'd prefer not to pursue this, I understand completely. You owe me nothing and you'll hear nothing further. Respectfully, Raymond Fletcher. He included his phone number and the mansion's address. Then he made copies of 3 documents: the Cambodia mission report with the manifest, one letter from 1995, the philosophical one where Walsh had come closest to peace, and a photocopy of a photograph he'd found at the bottom of the boxes showing a young woman holding an infant, the back inscribed in Walsh's hand, Annette Marie, March 16th, 1967, 2 days old. She has your eyes. Maggie. Ray sealed everything in a large envelope and drove to the post office. The clerk was Betty, 60-something, with the comfortable manner of small-town postal workers who'd been doing the same job for decades. Needs signature confirmation, she asked, weighing the envelope. Yes, ma'am. Important documents. Very. She processed the certified mail and handed him the receipt. Hope they appreciate it, whatever it is. Me too. The waiting began. Ray threw himself into work with the focused intensity of a man trying not to think. He tore down the Charger's transmission, a 4-speed manual that needed a complete rebuild. He ordered a kit for $380 and spent 2 days cleaning every gear, every shaft, every bearing by hand. The work was meditation. The work was prayer. The work kept his hands busy and his mind from spinning out into anxiety about whether Ellen would respond, whether she'd want to know, whether he'd made a terrible mistake in opening this door. On Wednesday of the waiting week, Eugene Harris called. The voice on the phone was raspy and Southern-aged, but strong. This Raymond Fletcher, speaking. Name's Eugene Harris. You've been asking questions about Ben Walsh at McCord Air Force Base. Ray tensed slightly. I have. How'd you get my number? Rodriguez at the archives gave it to me. Said you were trying to help Ben somehow. That true? Yeah, found his daughter, sent her a letter, waiting to hear if she wants to know. A long pause on the line. Then quietly, Jesus, Ben looked for her 40 years. You find her in a month? Had tools he didn't, internet, public records. Can I come up? Like to see Ben's place, pay my respects. Sure, when works for you. Tomorrow works. Eugene Harris arrived the next afternoon in a 1970s Ford F-150 that had been maintained with the same care Ray gave his tools. The man who climbed out was 82 years old, lean and weathered, moving with the deliberate care of someone who'd learned not to trust his balance anymore. He wore a VFW cap and carried a cane, but his handshake was firm. Eugene. Ray. They stood sizing each other up the way veterans did, reading service and posture and bearing. Then Eugene turned to look at the house, and his expression went soft. Ben loved this place, bought it in '92, said it felt like home, first time anything had since before Vietnam. You flew with him. Vietnam 68 to 72, then relief missions in the 80s. Crazy bastard never could stay out of the fight. They walked the property together, Eugene moving slowly but steadily. At the Cessna, he stopped and put his hand on the fuselage the same way Ray had the touch of a man greeting an old friend. This old girl, Ben and I flew her into places we had no business going. Cambodia 73, Ethiopia 84. She never let us down. You were on the Cambodia mission November 73, Sam. Eugene nodded. 43 people packed in like sardines. Engine failed 30 minutes from landing. Ben kept her in the air through sheer will. Landed on a strip that was half destroyed. Should have died. Didn't. Ray chose his next words carefully. One of those passengers was his daughter. He didn't know. Eugene went very still. His hand tightened on the cane. Ellen Carlisle. Little girl, maybe 6. She sat behind Ben the whole flight, cried for an hour straight. Ben gave her his jacket, talked to her real gentle. Told her to look at clouds, be brave. You knew, not then. Ben told me years later, 95 maybe. He'd figured out the Carlisles adopted a girl in 67, same age as Annette would have been. But he could never confirm it. Record sealed. Couldn't contact them. Eugene shook his head slowly. Ate him alive knowing he might have saved her, never knowing for sure. Now we know for sure. You contacted her. Sent a letter 3 days ago, waiting to hear back. Eugene looked at Ray with eyes that had seen too much. What did you tell her? The truth, everything. Good, Eugene nodded. Ben deserves that. She deserves that. They went to the study. Eugene looked at the photographs and cried silently, tears running down weathered cheeks. He pointed to one frame. That's me, 69. Da Nang. He picked up one of Walsh's letters, held it like it might break. He wrote these every year, never stopped hoping. Before Eugene left, he gripped Ray's shoulder. You tell her something for me if she comes. What's that? Tell her Ben Walsh was the best man I ever knew. Braver than any medal could show. And he loved her every single day, even when he didn't know her name. I'll tell her. You're a good man, Fletcher, finishing this for him. Veterans take care of veterans. Yes, sir, they do. On day 24 of waiting, the response arrived. Ray's hand shook as he opened the cream envelope with Ellen Porter's return address. Dear Mr. Fletcher, I received your letter 5 days ago. I've read it perhaps 20 times. I don't know how to begin processing what you've shared. I've always known I was adopted. My parents, Theodore and June Carlisle, never hid that from me. They were wonderful people who gave me a beautiful childhood. They both passed years ago, Dad in 2003, Mom in 2011, and I've often wondered about my biological parents but never felt right about searching. It seemed disloyal. Your letter changes everything. The photograph of my birth mother, I see her when I look in the mirror. I have her smile, her hands, her eyes, so my husband tells me. The mission report left me breathless. I do remember that flight, being frightened, being cold, a pilot who was kind to me, who let me look at clouds, who gave me his jacket. I remember his voice telling me to be brave, to learn that pilot was my biological father, that he saved my life without knowing who I was. I don't have adequate words. I would very much like to meet you and see the house where my father lived. I need time to process this, to talk with my family. With 3 weeks from now work, I can drive up from Bend about 5 hours. This feels impossible, like fiction. But I'm grateful you took the time to find me and tell me this story. Thank you, Ellen Carlisle Porter. Ray read the letter 4 times, then he called Mitchell. Dad, she responded. Walsh's daughter, she's coming. That's incredible. Mitchell's voice carried genuine emotion. When 3 weeks, she remembers the flight, remembers her father giving her his jacket. Dad, Mitchell paused. What you're doing finishing this for him, that matters. That really matters. After the call ended, Ray sat with Ellen's letter and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not quite hope, not quite peace, but something close to both. A sense that maybe some stories did get endings, maybe some circles did close, maybe some missions could be finished even across the barrier of death. He had 3 weeks to prepare, 3 weeks to make the mansion worthy of Captain Walsh's memory, 3 weeks to get ready for the moment when a daughter came home to meet the father she'd never known. Ray stood and looked around the study. Time to work. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Ray worked with the focused intensity of a man on a mission, and that's exactly what it was. A mission. The kind that allowed no shortcuts, no half measures, no excuses for failure. He started with the study. Every document had to be organized chronologically, telling Walsh's story in the proper sequence. The flight logs went first, arranged by year, showing the progression from young pilot to seasoned veteran. Then the letters sorted by decade, each one a marker on the long road of searching. The photographs came next, labeled with dates and locations when Ray could determine them. Cambodia, Ethiopia, Nicaragua. Faces Walsh had saved, places Walsh had been, missions Walsh had flown. The voice recordings sat ready on the desk, the old realistic tape player cleaned and tested. Ray had listened to all 3 tapes now, but he'd saved detailed notes on the third one, the recording from 1989 when Walsh had been 52. That one felt the most important, the most honest. That one should be Ellen's to hear first. Ray created a timeline on the wall using string and push pins, something visual that would help Ellen understand the scope of her father's search. 1967. Annette born, given up for adoption. 1968 to 1990. Military service and unauthorized humanitarian missions. 1973, Cambodia flight, 43 people saved. 1995. The year Walsh seemed to accept he might never find her. 2018, death alone in this house. The rest of the mansion received equal attention. Ray replaced every broken window, all 12 of them, hauling the old frames to the dump and installing new glass with the patient precision he'd learned from 42 years of repair work. He fixed the porch steps, replacing rotted boards and reinforcing the supports until the whole structure felt solid again. The roof got proper patches where the tarps had been temporary fixes. He cleared paths through the overgrown yard, cutting back blackberry vines and trimming low branches. Not manicuring it, just making it accessible. The wilderness was part of the property's character, part of Walsh's isolation. Ray respected that. The Cessna received special care. Ray spent 2 full days washing decades of grime from the fuselage, cleaning bird nests, from the cockpit, polishing the instruments, even though half of them no longer worked. He hung Walsh's flight jacket back inside positioned, so it would be the first thing visible when someone opened the door. Then he made a small plaque from a piece of oak routing the letters by hand. Captain Benjamin Walsh, USAF 1937 to 2018. Saved 200+ lives. He mounted it on a post beside the plane. The Charger sat next to the Cessna, now hood-open engine, partially reassembled. Ray had made real progress in the past 3 weeks. The transmission was rebuilt and reinstalled. The engine block had been cleaned and measured new pistons, ordered the crankshaft sent out for machine work. It wasn't running yet, but it would be. Given time, everything could be fixed. Mitchell called on a Tuesday evening, 2 days before Ellen was scheduled to arrive. "How are you holding up, Dad?" "Good. Busy. Getting everything ready." "Dylan's really excited about Thanksgiving. Keep asking when we're going to Grandpa's house to work on the Charger." Ray felt warmth spread through his chest. "Tell him I ordered the camshaft. Should be here next week. We can install it together." "He'll love that." Mitchell paused. "You sound different. Better. Got purpose now. Project worth doing." "Yeah." Another pause, heavier. "Dad, I'm sorry we let so much time go by. I'm sorry I didn't try harder." "We both didn't try. That's on both of us." "Well, we're trying now." "Yeah, we are." After the call, Ray walked through the mansion one final time, checking everything with the critical eye of a craftsman inspecting his work. The kitchen was clean, functional. The bathroom had hot water and no leaks. The study was organized like a museum exhibit, respectful and complete. The house wasn't restored, not by a long shot, but it was ready. It was worthy. The night before Ellen's arrival, Ray barely slept. He lay in his sleeping bag in the parlor, staring at the ceiling and thinking about fathers and daughters and all the ways love could be delivered too late. Walsh had spent 50 years searching. 50 years of letters never sent, of missions, flown in penance, of children saved who weren't his daughter, but maybe represented her in some cosmic accounting. And all that time, Ellen had been living her life in Oregon, growing up, becoming a nurse, getting married, having children, being happy presumably with the Carlyles who'd raised her and loved her and given her stability. Walsh had been right to stop searching in the end, right to let her have her life without the complication of a biological father showing up with his guilt and his need. But now that father was dead and the truth could be told without causing the disruption Walsh had feared, now Ellen could know without having to choose, could understand without being asked to forgive. The timing was terrible and perfect at once. Ray rose before dawn and made coffee, then stood on the porch watching the sun come up through the pines. The air was cold and clear, carrying the smell of Douglas fir and damp earth. November in Washington, the edge of winter. He thought about Cambodia in 1973, about a Cessna overloaded with refugees, about a 6-year-old girl crying in the back seat while her biological father told her to be brave. The cosmic irony of it still staggered him. But maybe that's what made it grace instead of tragedy. Walsh had done the right thing without knowing it was the right thing. Had saved his daughter not because she was his daughter, but because she was a child who needed saving. The purity of that motive somehow sanctified everything that came after. At 2 o'clock, a silver Honda Civic pulled into the driveway. Ray watched from the porch as a woman climbed out of the passenger side, followed by a man from the driver's seat. Ellen Carlisle Porter was 58 years old, medium height, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore jeans and a fleece jacket and hiking boots, the uniform of Pacific Northwest women who valued function over fashion. But it was her face that stopped Ray's breath. The bone structure, the set of the eyes, the way she looked at the mansion with an expression caught between curiosity and apprehension. She had Walsh's eyes. Exactly. The same thoughtful intensity Ray had seen in 40 years of photographs. Ray stepped off the porch. "Mrs. Porter," "Mr. Fletcher." Her voice was soft, trained to calm by decades of hospice work. "Please call me Ellen." "Ray." They shook hands. Her grip was firm, professional. The man beside her was tall and solid with kind eyes and the protective stance of a husband who knew his wife was walking into emotional territory. "This is my husband, Gerald." Gerald's handshake was strong. "Appreciate you doing this. Means a lot to Ellen. Means a lot to me, too. Come on in." Ray gave them the tour, slowly letting Ellen set the pace. She moved through the rooms like someone trying to absorb everything at once, touching door frames, running her fingers along window sills, looking at the spaces where her biological father had lived out his last decades. In the living room, she stopped in front of the aviation photographs. "He lived here. My father lived here." "Bought it in '92, Ray said. "Lived here till he died in 2018. "Alone." "Yes, ma'am." Ellen's expression flickered. "That's sad." Ray didn't disagree. They moved to the kitchen, where maps still hung above the table. Ellen traced routes with her finger, following lines her father had drawn to places most people only saw on news reports. He went to all these places. Humanitarian missions, after he retired from the military, flew relief supplies, evacuated refugees, worked mostly independent outside official channels. Gerald leaned in to study the maps. "How many people did he save?" "Records show over 200, probably more that weren't documented." They walked down the hallway where photographs told the story of Walsh's life in chronological progression. Ellen stopped at each one, studying faces, looking for herself in him. Ray watched her process the genetic echoes. The nose, the jawline, the hands. "I have his nose," she said quietly. Gerald squeezed her shoulder. "You do." The study was last. Ellen stopped in the doorway the same way Ray had that first time, sensing something sacred in the space. The afternoon light came through the windows at an angle, illuminating the organized chaos of a life's work. Documents arranged on the desk, photographs on the walls, bookshelves packed with volumes on aviation and war and geography. "This is where I found everything," Ray said. "Behind that bookshelf, there's a hidden compartment." Ellen walked to the panel, ran her fingers along the seam where it had been concealed. "Why did he hide it?" "I think he wanted it found eventually. Maybe by you." She approached the desk where Ray had laid out the documents in careful sequence. Flight logs, letters, photographs, the mission report, everything arranged to tell the story without overwhelming. "May I? Everything here is yours, was always yours. I'm just the caretaker." Ray excused himself to make coffee, giving them privacy. He stood in the kitchen, listening to the old percolator bubble and thinking about what was happening in that room. A daughter reading her father's words for the first time. A husband supporting his wife through emotional territory that had no map. When Ray returned 20 minutes later, with coffee and cups, Ellen had moved to the letters. She was crying quietly, tears running down her face as she read words written decades before she knew she needed them. Gerald stood behind her chair, one hand on her shoulder, reading over her head. Ray set the coffee on the desk and moved to leave, but Ellen looked up. "Stay, please. You're part of this story, too." So Ray sat in the third chair and waited while Ellen read through the decades of unsent correspondence. He watched her face as she moved from the hopeful letters of the '70s to the desperate ones of the '80s to the resigned acceptance of the '90s. Watched her absorb her father's voice, his guilt, his love, his endless searching. She picked up the photograph of herself as an infant held by Maggie Wells. The inscription on the back, Annette Marie, March 16, 1967. 2 days old, she has your eyes, Maggie. My birth mother, she was so young. 20 years old according to your father's notes. Just a girl, really, making an impossible choice. Ellen set the photograph down carefully. My parents, the Carlyles, they told me my birth mother loved me very much. That giving me up was the hardest thing she'd ever done. I used to imagine her, wonder what she looked like. You have her smile, Ray said, in his eyes. Ellen held up one of Walsh's flight photos next to her face, comparing. People must have told him that. When I was a baby, they must have said she has your eyes. Then she picked up the mission report, read the cover page slowly, her brow furrowing. Cambodia evacuation, 1973. She looked at Ray. I was there. I remember being in Cambodia. We left in a hurry. My parents were scared but trying not to show it. The manifest is on page 3. Ellen flipped pages, scanned the list of names. Her eyes moved methodically until they stopped. Her whole body went still. Line 17. Carlisle L&M, age 6, American, daughter of Theodore and June Carlisle missionaries. She read it once, twice, 3 times, then looked up at Ray with something like shock in her eyes. He saved me. Yes, ma'am. My father, my biological father, he flew that mission. Ray nodded. November 18th, 1973. Unauthorized flight, engine trouble, ground fire, emergency landing. He nearly died getting you out. Ellen's voice dropped to barely a whisper. But he didn't know. No, I don't think he ever knew. Ellen stood abruptly and walked to the window. Gerald followed his arm around her waist. They stood looking out at the Cessna in the yard, and Ray saw the moment the connection registered. That plane, she said, that's the plane from the mission. Same one, N3847X. You can check the serial number against the manifest. Ellen pressed her hand to her mouth. When she spoke again, her voice was shaking. I remember it. I remember that plane, or one exactly like it. She turned to face Ray, tears streaming down her face. There was a pilot. I was crying, so cold. He took off his jacket, this worn leather jacket, and wrapped it around me. It smelled like coffee and fuel. He told me to look at the clouds, to be brave. Her voice broke completely. He had kind eyes, gentle hands. I remember his voice saying, "You're safe now, little one. Just be brave." Gerald held her while she sobbed. Ray stood quietly by the door, giving them space. After a long moment, Ellen composed herself enough to speak. That was him. That was my father. And I was right there, right in front of him. And neither of us knew. But you remember his kindness, Ray said gently. After 52 years, you remember. That matters. Ellen sat back down, wiping her eyes. You mentioned recordings in your letter. 3 tapes, voice recordings your father made, reflections on his missions and his life. I've listened to 2, saved the 3rd. It felt right to wait for you. Can I hear them? Of course. Ray retrieved the old realistic tape recorder from the shelf and set it on the desk. His hands were steady as he loaded the 3rd tape, the one from November 1989. 22 years after Ellen's birth, 16 years after Cambodia. He made this when he was 52, Ray said. Same age you are now. Ellen and Gerald leaned forward. Ray pressed play. Static crackled. Then a click. Then Benjamin Walsh's voice filled the study, worn but warm, carrying the accent of the South. November 1989. I'm 52 years old today, and I'm tired. A pause. The sound of a chair creaking, the same chair Ellen sat in now. Not tired physically, though my back aches and my hands aren't as steady as they were. Tired of searching. Tired of hoping. Tired of carrying this weight. Ellen closed her eyes, absorbing her father's voice like water after drought. I've spent 22 years looking for you, Annette. 22 years of private investigators, sealed records, doors that won't open. I've flown to every corner of the world. Saved hundreds of lives. And I still can't find the one person I need to find. Walsh's voice carried the exhaustion of a man who'd fought a battle he couldn't win. Maybe that's the universe telling me something. Maybe you don't need to be found. Maybe you're happy somewhere living a good life, and my showing up would only complicate things. Ellen whispered through her tears. I was happy. They were good parents. I've been thinking about what it means to be a father, Walsh continued. I walked away before you were born because I was 19 and terrified. Your mother Maggie was 20 and braver than both of us. She held you, named you, then made the choice to give you to people who could provide what we couldn't. His voice cracked slightly. I've spent half my life trying to prove I'm not the coward who ran away. But maybe the running was the bravest thing I did. Maybe knowing I couldn't be what you needed was more honest than staying and failing you. The tape hissed in the silence. Every mission I fly, every child I help evacuate from danger, I wonder if they're like you. Wonder if you're safe somewhere, if you're loved, if you know how to be brave. Ellen nodded, crying harder now. They taught me. They taught me to be brave. I hope your parents gave you everything I couldn't, Walsh said. In a way, every child I save is you. Every frightened face looking up from a refugee camp or disaster zone. That's you at 6 or 10 or 15. I can't save you because you don't need saving, but I can save them. Maybe that's enough. The recording continued, Walsh's voice growing softer. Annette, if you ever hear this, know that I thought of you every single day. Not with regret exactly, though there's plenty of that, but with love. A father's love from a distance, which is maybe the same as not loving you at all. But it's what I have to offer. A long pause filled with breathing. I hope you've been happy. I hope you've had a good life. That's all any father can want for his child. And maybe in some small way, the work I've done has made the world a little safer for you, even if we never meet. Another pause longer. I'm going to stop searching now. Not because I don't care, but because caring doesn't mean chasing. Sometimes love means letting go. You're 22 years old somewhere, living your life. I'm 52 here learning to live with mine. The tape wound down to empty hiss. Ray stopped it. The silence in the study was complete except for the sound of Ellen crying and Gerald's quiet comfort. Finally, Ellen spoke. He gave up. He stopped looking. He accepted, Ray said. There's a difference. He chose your happiness over his need. Gerald added gently, you might not have wanted to be found. He was right about that. You had parents you loved. A good life. His showing up might have caused more pain than healing. The Carlyles were good people, Ray said. Missionaries. They gave you what Walsh couldn't. He knew that. He made peace with it. Ellen wiped her eyes and looked at Ray directly. Why did you do this? Why did you search for me, finish his story? Because he was a veteran with an unfinished mission, and veterans finish missions even if we have to cross the grave to do it. But you didn't know him. Didn't matter. He was Air Force. My father was Army. Same generation, same wars, same wounds, different shapes. When I found those letters, I understood what he was trying to do. Couldn't let it stay unfinished. Ellen reached across the desk and took Ray's hand. Her grip was strong, a nurse's grip, capable and certain. Thank you. For everything. For caring enough to finish it. You deserve to know. He deserved to be remembered. They spent another hour in the study. Ellen asked about the photographs and Ray told her what he knew. Asked about the missions and Ray showed her the flight logs. She held the infant photograph of herself with Maggie and cried again, quieter this time, grieving a mother she'd never known. When the light began to fade, they walked outside together. Ray led them to the Cessna. Ellen approached it like approaching an altar, reverent and careful. Ray opened the door. Inside, Walsh's flight jacket hung on its hook. This was his, found it under the seat. Ellen reached in and touched the leather, brought it close to her face and breathed in. This is it, she whispered. This is the jacket. I remember this smell, coffee and fuel and him. Ray lifted the jacket from its hook and held it out. It's yours. Ellen put it on. It was too big, swallowing her frame, but she wrapped it around herself like armor, like coming home. I was 6 years old, freezing, crying, and he gave me this, told me I was safe, told me to be brave. She looked at Ray with tears still streaming. He was my father. For those few hours when it mattered most, he was exactly the father I needed. He saved my life. He comforted me. He kept me safe. She touched the fuselage of the plane, and he never knew. But you remember, Ray said. That's what matters now. You remember his kindness. That's who he was. 3 months later, on a clear day in early March, both families gathered at the mansion. Ray stood on the porch watching cars arrive, feeling something he hadn't felt in decades. Not quite belonging, but something close. The promise of it, anyway. Mitchell and Dylan arrived first, the Charger engine parts they'd ordered, stacked in the truck bed. Preston followed his younger brother straight to the garage, both boys already talking about torque specs and compression ratios. Patricia squeezed Ray's shoulder as she passed, no words needed. Claire came next with Grace, who immediately wandered toward the wildflowers blooming in the cleared sections of yard. Owen pulled up last, Jessica helping the twins out of their car seats. Lily and Ruby, 5 years old and meeting their grandfather for the third time in their lives, but the first time that would matter. Ellen's family arrived together in 2 cars. Emma and her husband, with their children. Marcus, the pediatric surgeon, driving alone. Sarah with little Morgan asleep in the back seat. Gerald helped Ellen from their car, his hand steady at her back. The children found each other instantly the way children do. Adult awkwardness meant nothing to them. Within minutes, they were playing an elaborate game that involved the Cessna and the Charger and more imagination than any adult could track. Ray fired up the grill. Owen and Gerald joined him, and they fell into the comfortable silence of men cooking meat, commenting on temperature and timing rather than feelings. But the feelings were there anyway in the spaces between. Mitchell found Ray later while stakes were resting. "This is good, Dad. What you've built here." "Didn't build it, just finished what Walsh started." "No," Mitchell shook his head. "You built this gathering, these families. You could have just sent Ellen the documents, could have finished it that way, but you made a place for her to come home to, for all of us to come home to." Ray didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. After dinner, everyone gathered on the porch. 18 people in borrowed chairs and on porch steps, full of food and the kind of tired that comes from good work and better company. Eugene Harris had made the drive down, 82 years old and stubborn as oak, refusing to miss this. Ellen stood. "I have news some of you know, but I want to share with everyone." She held up an official letter. The military approved the petition for posthumous recognition. In June, there'll be a ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery. My father and his flight crews will be honored for humanitarian missions spanning 1968 to 1990. Over 200 lives saved. Eugene wiped his eyes. "Ben deserved this 40 years ago." "Better late than never," Ellen said softly. She continued looking around at both families. "But more than that, I'm grateful for this. For all of us here. My father spent his life searching for connection and never found it. But his story brought us together. Reminded us what matters. Gave us a second chance to get it right." She looked at Ray. "My father would have liked you. You're both men who understand that it's never too late to finish what you started." Ray stood unexpected, his throat tight. He wasn't good at speeches. Never had been. But some things needed saying. "I bought this house for $10 because I was lonely. Because my kids had grown up and moved away, and I didn't know what to do with the rest of my life." He looked at Mitchell, Claire, Owen. "I thought I'd failed you three. After your mother died, I just survived. Kept you fed and clothed and safe. But I didn't really see you, didn't know you. And when you grew up and left, I thought I deserved that loneliness." His voice stayed steady. No crying, just honesty. "Then I found Captain Walsh's story, a father who spent decades searching for a daughter he'd given up, who flew into war zones trying to earn redemption, who saved hundreds but died alone." He looked at Ellen. "I found his daughter, but more than that, I found my own kids again. Because his story taught me it's never too late. Never too late to say I'm sorry. Never too late to trade. Never too late to be the father I should have been." Mitchell, Claire, and Owen came to him. No words, just arms around shoulders, the solid weight of family. Dylan and Preston joined them. Then Grace, then the twins, until Ray was surrounded by 3 generations of Fletchers who'd found their way back to each other through a dead man's letters in a $10 house. As evening settled into night and stars came out above the pines, Ray stood with Eugene by the Cessna. The old pilot ran his hand along the fuselage one more time. "You did good, Ray. Ben would be grateful. Just finish the mission. That's all any of us can do." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 men who understood that some things didn't need words. Inside, through the windows, Ray could see both families mixing. His grandchildren teaching Ellen's grandchildren card games. The adults talking and laughing and sharing stories. The mansion alive with voices and light and the promise of future gatherings. Ellen found Ray as people were saying goodbyes. "What will you do with this place?" "Keep it. Turn the study into a memorial, maybe. Let people come learn his story. Show them it's never too late to come home." "I'd like that. I'll help however I can." They stood together, looking at the Cessna monument to courage and failure and the unbearable weight of love. "Thank you," Ellen said again, "for finishing what he started, for giving me my father's story. Thank you for coming home." After everyone left, Ray sat alone on the porch in the quiet. The Cessna stood watch in the moonlight. The Charger waited patiently for its next session with Mitchell and Dylan. Inside, Walsh's study held 50 years of searching that had finally found its end. Ray thought about the letter he'd written, the research he'd done the moment Ellen had learned the truth. Thought about Walsh flying into Cambodia with a plane full of refugees, including his own daughter. About the cosmic grace that let a father save his child without knowing let kindness be pure because it was untainted by biology. Sometimes the houses we buy for $10 are really buying us, giving us what we didn't know we needed. A purpose, a mission, a second chance. Captain Walsh had spent his life searching and died without finding. But in the end, his daughter had found him. Through letters and missions and love that crossed 50 years, Ray had come here looking for a project, found redemption instead. Not Walsh's, his own. The mission was complete, both of them. Ray stood and walked inside, turning off lights as he went. Tomorrow, Mitchell was bringing Dylan back to work on the Charger. Next month, Owen and the twins for a weekend. Summer, all of them together. The house wasn't empty anymore. Neither was Ray. In the study, Walsh's photograph smiled from the wall. Young pilot in Vietnam, full of hope and fear and the terrible certainty of youth. Ray raised his hand in salute. Mission accomplished, Upton. You can rest now. Then Ray turned off the light and went to bed, ready for whatever came next. Because it's never too late to start again. Never too late to come home. Never too late to be brave. The story was finished. But the living had just begun.